of age, and if the between the sex between a husband and a wife is below 15 years of age, that shall be counted as rape, as sexual assault if the wife is less than 18 years of age. That was a landmark ruling that had come in. So as far as the entire journey and trajectory and evolution of laws in this country is concerned, not talking about all aspects of the personal law, but one particular aspect, which is about marriage of underage girls, the evolution seems to be moving in the direction that we should stop this. And of course, the final word needs to come from the Supreme Court of India. That's the law of the land, broadly speaking. But talking about how the governments should really pursue this, more importantly, what survives when there is a conflict, in the event of a conflict. Now, the Assam government's crackdown. This is a bid to end the menace of child marriages in the state. By many accounts, if you look at the NCRB data as well, it tells you that high instances of child marriages have been recorded in various districts of Assam. 4,000 plus cases of child marriage registered just in about 9 days. That's what the state government claims. 1,800 plus, about 2,000, that's the latest number that has come in. But more than 1,800 accused have been arrested so far across the state. This includes people who are directly involved. It also includes priests, qazis or pandits who are party to this crime which is happening. There is an extensive statewide operation in the next 3 to 4 days. This is going to be the focus of the state government, putting out a very, very clear message that child marriages by the administration are not going to be tolerated. The government says this is a drive to reduce the mortality rate. As I earlier said, infant mortality rate and maternal mortality rate is a point of concern for Assam. There are various voices within the opposition that claim that this is a one-sided, selective approach of the state government and has political overtones as well. We'll discuss all of those aspects, but not to forget that the key debate here is that do personal laws trump child rights? Personal laws which are violative of child rights, which are violative of the provisions of the POCSO, can they survive in modern independent India after 75 years of independence and the great constitutional journey that we have seen as a modern democratic republic? That's the key question that we ask here on Plain Speak tonight.
Subsequently, we started collecting data. Initially, we had collected data for 2022, 2021 and 2020. Most of the cases have been registered under different provisions of POCSO Act and sections of IPC.
Let's take this question to our panel of guests who are joining us on the broadcast. We have Pramod Swami from the Assam BJP, who's a spokesperson. Jahrul Islam from the AIAUDF, who's a spokesperson, is also joining us on the broadcast. Ashwini Dubey, who's an advocate on record from the Supreme Court of India, and Mr. Ravikant, who is the country head India from the Kailash Satyarthi Foundation, is also joining us on the broadcast. Mr. Swami, I'm coming to you first. What is the motive of the state government, and how do you rebut all the allegations that have been made that this perhaps could be politically motivated or targeted towards a particular community? Mr. Swami.
हाँ, इसमें हमारा मोटो एक ही है कि जो मैटरनल मोर्टेलिटी और इन्फेंट मोर्टेलिटी की जो दर जो है वो आसाम में काफी बढ़ गई थी, क्योंकि बाल विवाह की वजह से मातृशक्ति की और बच्चों की मृत्यु हो रही थी। तो सरकार ने उनके स्वास्थ्य को उन्नत करने के लिए और जो 14 बरस की जो उम्र है, 14 बरस की उम्र जो शादी की उम्र नहीं होती है, और इसके लिए एक देश में एक कानून है, प्रोटेक्शन ऑफ चिल्ड्रन फ्रॉम सेक्सुअल ऑफेंसेस, उसको पॉस्को एक्ट बोलते हैं। उस पॉस्को एक्ट के तहत सरकार ने कार्रवाई की है कि 14 वर्ष की उम्र में अगर बच्चियों की शादी होगी तो उनके स्वास्थ्य पे भी खराब असर पड़ेगा, और वो अगर उनके जो बच्चे होंगे उनके स्वास्थ्य पे भी खराब असर पड़ेगा, और इससे जो मृत्यु दर है वो भी काफी बढ़ रही है, और इससे जो विभिन्न रकम की समस्याएं उत्पन्न हो रही है, इससे जनसंख्या में भी वृद्धि हो रही है। तो सरकार ने ये कदम जो है हमारे हमारी मातृशक्ति को सक्षम बनाने के लिए, मातृशक्ति के हितों को मद्देनजर रखते हुए सरकार ने ये कदम उठाया है। और इस कदम को किसी जाति, धर्म और भाषा के चश्मे से नहीं देखना चाहिए, क्योंकि माता और बहनें हमारी जो हैं, उनको अगर हम वुमेन एम्पावरमेंट की अगर हम बात करते हैं, तो ये इस देश में दो रकम के मापदंड नहीं हो सकते। 14 बरस की उम्र की शादी की उम्र जो है वो कानूनन भी वैध नहीं है, और उसको नैतिक आधार पे भी वैध नहीं है।
नहीं, आप बिल्कुल ठीक कह रहे हैं कि नैतिक और स्वास्थ्य के आधार पर 14 साल की बच्चियों की शादी एक आजाद भारत में ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए, और ये बिल्कुल आप ठीक बोल रहे हैं। लेकिन बहुत सारे ऐसे पर्सनल लॉज हैं, जैसे एक पूरी एक बहस है जो सुप्रीम कोर्ट में होगी, हाई कोर्ट्स में हो चुकी है, बहुत सारे अलग अलग फैसले भी आए अलग अलग उच्च न्यायालयों से, चाहे वो दिल्ली चंडीगढ़ हाई कोर्ट हो या कर्नाटका हो, कई जगह से अलग अलग जजमेंट्स आए, और सुप्रीम कोर्ट को इस बात पर एक अंतिम निर्णय अपना देना है। लेकिन मुस्लिम पर्सनल लॉ में 15 साल की उम्र के बाद एक लड़की की शादी की जा सकती है। बहुत सारे हाई कोर्ट्स इस देश में हैं जिन्होंने कहा है कि एक कस्टमरी प्रैक्टिस है, इसको माना जाता रहा है इस देश में, और जब तक सुप्रीम कोर्ट इसको निरस्त नहीं कर देता, ये कन्वेंशन, ये कस्टम चलता रहेगा। उसके बारे में आप क्या कहेंगे स्वामी जी?
देखिए, कानून जो है, कानून से ऊपर कोई नहीं है। इस पे विधि के जो जानकार है और न्यायालय जो है वो इस पे अपना पक्ष रखने के लिए स्वतंत्र है, और न्यायालय जो भी पक्ष रखेगा उस पक्ष को मानने के लिए असम सरकार भी इसमें मानने के लिए बाध्य है। लेकिन हमारी जो सरकार है उसने कानूनी पक्षों की सारी जानकारी लेकर करके ही ये कार्य किए हैं। तो मेरे ख्याल से कानूनी इसमें कोई अड़चन नहीं आनी चाहिए, और बाकी तो न्यायालय का जो फैसला है उसका इंतजार हम करेंगे। न्यायालय में अगर कोई जाता है तो न्यायालय इसके ऊपर में निश्चित रूप से विचार करके अपना जो मत न्यायालय रखेगा उस मत का निश्चित रूप से सम्मान किया जाएगा।
जी जी, जहरुल इस्लाम भी हमारे साथ जुड़े हुए हैं। जहरुल जी, आपके पास आऊंगी, आपसे समझना चाहूंगी, असम सरकार का कहना है कि उनका जो पूरा कदम है वो महिला स्वास्थ्य के हित में है, वो समाज कल्याण के लिए एक ऐसा कड़ा कदम है जो सरकार उठा रही है, और उसको किसी जाति या धर्म से जोड़ना सिर्फ राजनीति है, सरकार की मंशा नहीं है। आप क्या कहना चाहेंगे?
नहीं, चाइल्ड मैरिज के खिलाफ हम भी हैं, हम भी इसका खिलाफत करते हैं, हम भी इसका विरोध करते हैं। लेकिन हमारा क्वेश्चन ये है, समाज में चाइल्ड मैरिज नहीं होना चाहिए। ये चाइल्ड मैरिज होने से समाज में बहुत सारा खराब प्रभाव आ जाता है, जिसके वजह से सामाजिक जो बंधन है वो भी खराब होता है, और चाइल्ड मैरिज के वजह से जो बच्चियां हैं उनका भी उनका भी जीवन, सब में बहुत सारा दिक्कत आ जाता है। ठीक है, ये सब हम मानते हैं। लेकिन आज आसाम गवर्नमेंट जो काल से शुरू किया है, चाइल्ड मैरिज करने वाला जो लड़का है उनको गिरफ्तारी का जो कार्यक्रम शुरू किया है, अभी तक जब मैं आपसे बात कर रहा हूँ, अब तक 2044 accused has been arrested by Assam government अभी तक। जी, मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है, ये जो केसेस गवर्नमेंट ने लिया है जिसके आधार पर इनको अरेस्ट कर रहे हैं, ये 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022 इन 4 सालों के बीच में जो केस रजिस्टर्ड हुए हैं उनके आधार पर इनको गिरफ्तार कर रहे हैं। मेरा क्वेश्चन गवर्नमेंट से ये है कि अब से 2021 से पहले भी असम में बीजेपी का गवर्नमेंट था, तब जब केस रजिस्टर हुआ था, तब इसी तरह आज जिस तरह आप लोग हार्ड स्टेप उठा रहे हैं उसी तरह आप लोग पहले क्यों नहीं उठा रहा था? क्यों एक साथ इतना सारा आप लोग चमक देने के लिए कि 2000, 3000, 5000 हम अरेस्ट करेंगे?
नहीं, तो आपका सवाल सरकार की टाइमिंग पे है कि अगर आप हजारों लोगों को अरेस्ट कर रहे हैं, आपने पहले क्यों नहीं किया? लेकिन मेरिट पर आप सरकार से कोई सवाल नहीं पूछना चाहते, सरकार की मंशा पर आपको कोई शक नहीं है, क्या ये बोलना सही होगा?
मैं यही बोल रहा हूँ, यही पे आ रहा हूँ। सरकार चमक देना चाह रहा है कि हम मतलब जो मूल इशू है, जो मेन इशू है, इससे डाइवर्ट करना चाह रहे हैं। ये हमेशा सरकार का एक गेम प्लान रहा है।
कौन सा मूल इशू, कौन सा मूल
इशू, बड़ा मुद्दा, ये सब लोग, महंगाई, बेरोजगारी, ये सब जब लोग सवाल उठाना शुरू कर देते हैं, तब ये गवर्नमेंट क्या करता है?
सर, इन्फेंट मोर्टालिटी रेट, मैटरनल मोर्टालिटी रेट, ये सब भी तो डेवलपमेंट इंडाइसेस हैं, ये सब भी तो इम्पोर्टेंट मुद्दे हैं इस पूरे देश के।
अभी फर्टिलिटी रेट जो है वो इंडिया का 2.2 है, अभी कम हो गया है। अभी हर जाति, हर धर्म के लिए ये कम हो गया है।
अच्छा,
अगर
चलिए
बीजेपी
एक दूसरे
जो
मुद्दे पर
मंशा
आते हैं।
है,
नहीं,
वो
आपने
हिडन
सरकार की टाइमिंग पर सवाल उठाया, ये सवाल मैं प्रमोद स्वामी से जरूर पूछूंगी। मेरा आपसे सवाल है, मुस्लिम पर्सनल लॉ में 18 साल से कम उम्र की बच्चियों की शादी को आज भी शरीयत के कानून के तहत जायज माना जाता है और उसको इंडियन लॉ में भी कई हाई कोर्ट्स ने वैलिड माना है। उनका कहना है कि ये प्रैक्टिस है, कस्टमरी प्रैक्टिस जो चलती आई है। सुप्रीम कोर्ट में ये मामला अभी भी लंबित है। इस पूरी प्रैक्टिस के बारे में आप क्या कहना चाहिए? क्या 18 साल से कम उम्र की लड़कियों की शादी इस्लाम के धर्म में या किसी भी धर्म में परमिटेड होनी चाहिए कानूनन रूप से?
देखिए, जो पर्सनल लॉ है वो मुस्लिम का भी है, हिंदू का भी है, सिख का भी है, जैन का भी है, सबका है। पर्सनल लॉ जो है वो पर्सनल लॉ के तहत जो 15 इयर्स में मुस्लिम बच्चियां शादी कर सकते हैं, ये आर्टिकल 195 के आधार पर ये प्रावधान है, ये राइट है। अभी गवर्नमेंट अगर उनका जो हिडन मंशा है वो चाहते हैं कि ये चाइल्ड मैरिज तो ज्यादा मुस्लिमों के बीच में हो रहा है और इसी के हिसाब से मुस्लिम को थोड़ा तरसार करने के लिए अगर ये चमक देना चाह रहे हैं तो वो गलत है। वो गलत है। कोई मुसलमान नहीं चाह रहे हैं कि अपने छोटे बच्चे को वो शादी कर दे, उसका जीवन बर्बाद कर दे।
नहीं, देखिए सर, होता क्या है कि हम सब बड़ी बड़ी बातें यहाँ बैठ के कर सकते हैं, लेकिन यथार्थ तो ये है ना कि अगर कानूनन रूप से मुसलमान बच्चियों की शादी 18 साल से कम उम्र में हो सकती है तो जो लोग ऐसा कर सकते हैं वो बहुत सारे कारणों की वजह से करते हैं। मेरा सवाल आपसे सीधा है, क्या कानूनी रूप से इस तरह की पर्सनल लॉ प्रैक्टिस को किसी भी तरीके की वैधता मिलनी चाहिए? जहरुल इस्लाम।
नहीं, अभी जो प्रैक्टिसेस चल रहा है ये प्रैक्टिसेस तो आज से नहीं चल रहे हैं, ये कई सालों से चल रहे हैं। तो इसके ऊपर सुप्रीम कोर्ट में बिल ला जाए, सुप्रीम कोर्ट अपना स्टैंड क्लियर करे कि मुस्लिम पर्सनल वोट रहना चाहिए नहीं चाहिए, हिंदू पर्सनल वोट रहना चाहिए नहीं चाहिए।
आपने अपना स्टैंड क्लियर नहीं किया। मैं अपने दूसरे गेस्ट के पास भी जाना चाहूंगी। I'd like to cut across to my other guest as well, Mr. Ashwini Dubey, and Ravikant is also with us on the broadcast. Ashwini ji, coming to you first. There's a conundrum of sorts that exists within the Indian law when it comes to personal law versus the POCSO. What does the IPC say? And that precarious situation that child marriages are not void ab initio. But let me simplify it further. Should any personal law which is in direct conflict with POCSO, such a serious law that has been drafted for the sexual and mental health protection of children in this country, should any personal law survive the teeth of POCSO?
No, see, Anusha, the POCSO Act, the Child Marriages Act, then the marriage is derived from the religious scriptures.
Right.
So the marriage is derived from the religious scripture is upfront to the Child Marriage Act 2006. It is upfront to the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act 2012. Why? There is a reason. Answering first question, the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act 2006 seeks to prohibit the solemnization of marriages of the girl below the age of 18 years and boy below the age of 21 years. Very rightly, you have very candidly, you have Anusha ji referred that is not the wide of initio, that is not the marriage is not that is not permitted, but that is also not void. So the act prescribes penalties for solemnization, promotion and allowing of child marriage. Now coming to the another aspect, the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act was enacted to protect children from offences of sexual assault, sexual harassment and pornography, and to provide a child-friendly system for the trial of these offences.
Yeah.
The act provides the sexual offences against the children below the age of 18 years shall be illegal, shall be an offense, and shall be child has been defined means that any person below the age of 18 years.
Right.
If there is a law, two laws exist, can it be said that look, our personal law says that at the age of 14 years, that is very tender age, very small age, we can do it, and there is various conflicting judgments. Now, third, the Supreme Court, Anusha ji, we have raised this argument with you, on you only we have had.
Yeah.
While triple talaq issue was pending in the Supreme Court said, look, various forms of talaqs and various other practices which are upfront to the constitution, which upfront to law of the land, should be also declared as void ab initio, but there has to we have to have the religious scholars' opinion. Now my friend has argued that look, this is an attempt to politicize this. Look, 4,000 child marriages are taking place in a state. 10,000, 15,000 people are involved. So it means it is not only the progressive, it is contrary to the progressive society, it is also harming the.
So would it be correct to say, Ashwini ji, that your opinion is that if there is any personal law that permits the marriage of underage girls below the 18 years of age, that personal law should not survive in this country anymore? Is that your opinion, sir?
Of course, yes, this is my opinion, and that there has to be a clear Constitution Article 21 and 15, 14, 15, 21, which says that there should not be any discrimination between the women and
in the garb of quote unquote protecting some kind of diversity or so-called personal laws, these kind of practices in modern independent India are outdated and should have no place. Ravikant ji, I'm coming to you and taking in a word from you. Child marriage is a youth social evil. There's a law that exists in the statute book. Various efforts have been taken by various state governments across the country. Right now, what the state of Assam is doing, how do you perceive the actions and the criticism which has come in from certain political quarters?
I think it is a most welcome step on behalf of the Assam government to take action because, you know, political leadership, if they are involved in social issues and they take up these issues, especially violation of protection of child rights, I think it's a big move which should be lauded, and steps needs to be taken to ensure that perpetrators who have committed this crime should be punished. Let me also explain you, because child marriages, there is a very big social acceptability across the country. In societies, people accept child marriages, and therefore legal deterrence is one very important initiative which governments can take, which can bring the fear of the law. And also it is important to understand that child marriage is a cross-cutting issues to human trafficking, to child sexual abuse, to domestic violence, and many other crimes. And therefore, the steps taken by Assam government is welcome step.
Ravikantji, you work on the ground with many survivors, with many victims, with many children who face these kind of, God forbid, these very difficult situations that one finds it's very difficult to imagine and fathom. But when it comes to such personal law practices that continue to survive in this country, where the marriage of underage girls below the age of 18 is permitted, what kind of impact does it have on the mental, emotional and sexual health of a girl child?
See, any child going through a marriage, as has been rightly pointed out, and also from the NFHS data which is coming out, there is a huge impact on terms with respect to maternal mortality, in terms of infant mortality, in terms of violation of in terms of empowerments of the girl child. There are a lot of issues involved when young girls are forced into marriage. We live in a constitutional regime. The Constitution of India is very clear that over the time the Parliament will make laws for strengthening strengthening rights of women and children and protecting their rights.
I have last 2 minutes on the show. I want to go back to Pramod Swami and Jaharul Islam. Pramod Swami, coming to you. I am not doubting the intent of the state government when you say that there's a crackdown on child marriages. I think it should have happened much earlier. And this kind of step should be taken in various other states across the country to send a very strong political message that this will not be tolerated. But the question that the opposition is asking you is that why have you done it right now? Why didn't you take these steps earlier? Why did you wait for the situation to worsen? And more importantly, this kind of piecemeal effort, where in one go there is a 15-day drive and then the administration forgets about it. Will you sustain this momentum? आपने ये जो पूरी ड्राइव शुरू की है, क्या ये आने वाले समय में भी चलती रहेगी या जैसे ही हेडलाइंस खत्म हो जाएंगी वैसे ये ड्राइव भी खत्म हो जाएगी?
देखिए, हम जो भी काम करते हैं वो समाज के हित के लिए काम करते हैं, राष्ट्र के हित के लिए काम करते हैं, पहली बात। दूसरी बात, हमारे जो AIDF के साथी बैठे हैं, उन्होंने कहा कानून तो अच्छा है, लेकिन कानून को जरा देर से लेकर के आए। भाई, देर आए दुरुस्त आए, अच्छा कानून है तो आप उसका स्वागत कर रही है ना, फिर उसमें उसकी नुक्ताचीनी क्यों कर रहे हैं? दूसरी बात जो मैं आपको बताना चाहूंगा कि आसाम में 30% जो हमारी जो लड़कियों की जो शादी होती है वो 18 साल की जो कानूनी उम्र है उससे पहले की कर दी जाती है। तो ये एक बहुत चिंता का विषय है और इसमें एक अवेयरनेस की आवश्यकता है। और दूसरी बात, जो राज्य सरकार ने जो कदम उठाया है, जो केंद्र सरकार का जो स्वास्थ्य मंत्रालय है, उसने एक आधिकारिक एक सर्वे किया और उस सर्वे में जो नतीजे आए हैं, उसका जो डेटा है, उसके अनुसार आसाम में बाल विवाह के खिलाफ बाल विवाह की जो स्थिति आसाम में वो काफी मतलब भयावह स्थिति है और इसकी वजह से जो है वो मैटरनल मॉर्टेलिटी और इन्फेंट मॉर्टेलिटी के ऊपर में काफी ज्यादा असर पड़ रहा है। तो ये जो केंद्र सरकार का स्वास्थ्य मंत्रालय ने जो सर्वे किया किया, उसके आधार पर उसकी रिपोर्ट आने के बाद, सर्वे की रिपोर्ट आने के बाद राज्य सरकार ने इस विषय पर चिंतन
प्रमोद जी,
मंथन किया।
एक आरोप आपकी सरकार पर यह भी लगाया गया अभी कि आप कुछ मुद्दों से भटकाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं इस तरह की, इसलिए आपने 2000 लोगों को अरेस्ट कर लिया, क्योंकि अगर आपकी सच में मंशा ऐसी कुछ होती तो आप लॉन्ग टर्म में ऐसे कदम उठाते। इस तरह से तो आप कुछ मुद्दों से भटकाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, आपके राजनीतिक प्रतिद्वंदी ऐसा कह रहे हैं।
मैंने पहले ही कहा कि हमारे जो राजनीतिक प्रतिनिधि है, उन्होंने कहा कि कानून तो अच्छा है लेकिन देर से लेकर आए, और राजनीतिक मुद्दों से हटकाने के लिए हम इस कानून को लेकर के आए हैं। तो राजनीतिक मुद्दों की बातें तो चुनाव के समय होगी, जब चुनाव आएंगे तो राजनीतिक मुद्दों लेकर के और अन्य मुद्दे लेकर के आप लोग जनता के बीच में जाइए, आपको कौन रोकता है। और
अंतिम शब्द में जहरुल इस्लाम से लूंगी। जहरुल इस्लाम, मैं आपके पास आती हूँ।
ये एक सामाजिक कुरीति है और सामाजिक कुरीति को दूर करने के लिए
पहली बात तो
बिल्कुल नहीं सर, एक सवाल मेरा भी, फिर आप अपनी बात बोल लीजिएगा। सामाजिक कुरीति को दूर करने के लिए सिर्फ कानूनन और राजनीतिक का कदम नहीं उठाने चाहिए, समाज में अंदर भी एक किस्म का मंथन होना चाहिए। तो अगर आपको लगता है कि 18 साल से कम उम्र की लड़कियों की शादी इस देश में नहीं होनी चाहिए और मुस्लिम समाज में ऐसा हो रहा है, तो क्या समाज में अंदर से बदलाव की कोई अपेक्षा की जा सकती है? जहरुल इस्लाम।
बिल्कुल किया जा सकता है। मैं आपको एक बात बताना चाह रहा हूं कि अभी जो एक ऑनरेबल पैनलिस्ट बैठा है, उनने बनाए अकॉर्डिंग टू NFHS, इनका रिपोर्ट के हिसाब से पूरा इंडिया में जो टोटल मैरिज होता है वहां उससे 23% चाइल्ड मैरिज होता है। 23% चाइल्ड मैरिज होता है। और चाइल्ड मैरिज किसके बीच में होता है? जो दरिद्र है, जो गरीब है, जो अशिक्षित है, उनके बीच में ज्यादा चाइल्ड मैरिज होता है। तो गवर्नमेंट क्यों ध्यान नहीं देते हैं? जो हमारा, मैं असम की बात कर रहा हूँ, असम में ये बीजेपी शासन चल रहा है। बीजेपी शासन के टाइम में असम में, अभी पूरा इंडिया में असम नंबर 1 पे है। जो नारी निर्यातन होता है उसमें असम नंबर 1 पे है। जो बच्चे जन्म होते हैं, जो बच्चे मर जाते हैं, उसमें नंबर 1 पे असम आता है। बीजेपी गवर्नमेंट क्यों इसके ऊपर कदम नहीं उठा रहे हैं? क्यों नहीं उठा रहे हैं? अभी जो बेटी बचाओ बेटी पढ़ाओ, इसका जो टोटल बजट है 79%।
मैं आपसे जाते बस यही पूछूंगी, तो आप सरकार के इन सारे कदमों का स्वागत करते हैं, क्योंकि मैटरनल मोर्टालिटी रेट, इन्फेंट मोर्टालिटी रेट ये काफी हाई है, तो चाइल्ड मैरिजेस पे तो सरकार को कदम उठाना ही चाहिए। तो फिर आपका जो तर्क है, आपका क्रिटिसिज्म है, वो क्यों है?
नहीं, कदम उठाना चाहिए, हम भी स्वागत करते हैं, लेकिन दिखावा के लिए नहीं है। मैं आपको गारंटी के साथ कह रहा हूँ, ये जो कदम उठाया है ना, वो 2-3 दिन के अंदर ठप हो जाएगा।
देखते हैं सर आगे क्या होता है। और ये सवाल भी जायज है that this is an entire step that needs to be taken in the long run. I'm short of time. I thank all of you gentlemen for joining us on the broadcast. Pramod Swami, Jehrull Islam, Ashwini Dubey and Ravikant ji. Personal laws have their own place under Indian Constitution, but any personal law that permits the marriage of a girl or a child under the age of 18 should not have any place in modern independent India, a constitutional position that perhaps should be reaffirmed by the top court of the country. The matter is pending there for a final debate. Well, with that, we are slipping into a very short break. On the other side, the battle between the Supreme Court and the government of the day continues. The top court warns the government that any further delay in deciding on the appointments or the transfer will invite the ire of the court.
The biggest budget exclusive. FM's first post-budget interview to a private news network. What does the budget mean for the investor, the consumer, the taxpayer, the economy? FM Nirmala Sitharaman speaks to Network 18 Editor-in-Chief Rahul Joshi. The FM interview exclusive on CNN News 18.
Ukraine stops fighting, Ukraine ends. And so, as you saw when the President and President Zelensky met in Washington in December, the Ukrainians are committed to continuing to try to fight for their land, and we are now trying to get them what they will need to launch a successful winter and spring offensive, because currently the map on the ground does not favor them.
So I'm curious to know in this context, what the U.S. position is vis-a-vis India's stand. India has
Yeah.
not necessarily always taken the position that Western countries have taken on this conflict, and in particular about the import of Russian oil. Russia, which was selling less than 1% of India's energy needs when before this war began, and now it's India's largest energy supplier. I'm curious to know, have you had those conversations with your Indian counterparts?
So we've been having very rich conversations with India throughout this period, including before the war began, when we were worried about it. As you know better than I, India has historic dependencies that go back to the Soviet period, particularly in the security sphere. Almost all of India's weaponry comes from Russia and the Soviet Union. Now you see, not only is Russia not going to be in a position to resupply, but the weapons aren't working too well out there. So we've been having the conversation about diversifying away from that kind of dependency, doing more with the U.S. and with other friends in the defense sector. And of course, on the energy side, India, as you know, buys on the spot market, so it always goes for the best price. So one of the things that we've been talking about before and during and after the decision on an oil price cap by many of us was that this would actually benefit India. So even though you're buying more Russian oil, the fact that you're paying cheaper prices for it is good for India, but it also dries up the revenue that would otherwise contribute to Putin's war machine. So, this is where we are now. You're going to buy your oil from somewhere. What we want to ensure is that you're not fueling the war.
I started off by saying that this is India's G20 year. It's a big
big year.
Year for India. You must have seen billboards and hoardings all around town talking about the G20. The last G20 in Bali was sort of overshadowed by this war. Do you reckon in 8 months' time, when India hosts the G20, we would have been seeing the end of this war, or will that still be the dominant theme, as it were?
Zaka, if I had a crystal ball, I would love for the Ukrainian people for this conflict to be over. But I think what's more important is that as host of the G20, India has a hugely strong role to play in the message that all of the big democracies are sending to the two big autocracies that are trying to change the rules of the road by force and coercion, whether it's Russia or whether it's China. So we've been doing a lot of talking together with India as you get ready to host about the things that we need to work on together. We need to ensure resiliency in our supply chains. We need to ensure that China can't continue to indebt countries and not follow the global rules of the road there. I'm off to Sri Lanka after this. We talked about that, about our responsibilities for some of the challenges, whether it is in health. We've worked together on COVID. We're now working together on food security, which is obviously exacerbated by Russia's war on Ukraine. We have other work together to do to ensure resilient supply chains. Some of that work is being kicked off this week, in fact, by National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and National Security Advisor Doval. So a lot of things that we're doing together bilaterally are also enhanced by the fact that India is chairing the G20 this year.
I want to talk about the other autocracy, as you called it. There's been this ongoing standoff between India and China for the better part of the last 2 years. What is your best understanding of why China has tried to unilaterally change the status quo?
Well, obviously we oppose any unilateral efforts to, whether it's civilian, military, to change the status quo. I'm not going to speak for why China's doing what it is doing, but obviously it would be far better to try to settle these issues at the diplomatic table. In the past, India has had some success there, and I know that you are continuing to try, and we encourage that.
Just to take that conversation forward, the Indo-Pacific, of course, is a big priority for the United States, as indeed it is for India. Where do you see the future of Quad? We're already seeing countries like Japan, for example, which is a pacifist constitution, did not have an aggressive standing army, now really thinking seriously about changing that posture. Do you see an increasing militarization of the Indo-Pacific?
Well, we're trying to do actually the opposite, Zaka. We're trying to ensure through the cooperation that we have, India, Australia, Japan, US, to preserve a free and open Indo-Pacific, not only in our own interest, but in global interest. 50% of global trade goes through the Taiwan Straits. So the work that we do in Quad is about keeping things open, keeping them free, but it's also about advancing maritime security, it's about advancing climate goals, it's advancing food security, all of these kinds of things that the democracies need to work on together, even as the autocracies work to change the global rules of the road.
You talked about Taiwan. There is increasing concern that there could be some kind of a military flare-up between China and Taiwan. We even had recently an American general say that in 2025 there's going to be a military action between China and Taiwan. What are the conversations you're having with the Chinese and with the Taiwanese to try and avoid that situation?
As you know, Zaka, President Biden sat down with President Xi Jinping last autumn in Bali to try to talk president to president about our responsibilities as big powers to maintain peace, to maintain stability.
Welcome back. You're watching Plain Speak. The Collegium debate has been reignited yet again. Well, when did it die down? The judiciary versus executive war has refused to die down, with slots coming in, with attacks coming in from both the sides. Today, the Supreme Court warned the union government, saying that any delay in hearing recommendations regarding the transfer of judges between various high courts can result in administrative and judicial actions. Justice Kaul on the bench said that delay in deciding on the transfer of high court judges may result in both administrative and judicial actions, which may not be palatable. I'm quoting from the judge. You had Law Minister, who also rigged up the issue of pending cases. There was a written response that was filed in Lok Sabha. And he cited various reasons as to why there is huge pendency in the cases at various high courts. There were multiple reasons that were cited, but one of the reasons, according to the ministry, is the vacation period of the courts. It's one of the many reasons for the pendency of cases. And this is not the first time you would know that the centre and judiciary are at loggerheads with each other. This is a fight for transparency, or this is a fight for control. The reform of Collegium system, or the appointment of judges in this country, is an issue that has continued to dominate the headlines. The Law Minister even said that the government should have some kind of representation at the search committee level. The Collegium should reform itself because it's in violation of various orders of the Supreme Court, which have spoken about large-scale reforms that need to take place. So who should appoint the judges in the country? In India, which has had a wonderful constitutional evolution and history, why is it that the system of appointment of judges remains opaque? Now, the argument is that the government is against Collegium. The current system is opaque, it's not transparent, there is no accountability. The judiciary has been against NJAC. That is one of the key reasons that it was struck down by a constitutional bench. The court is of the view that the government has undermined judicial independence via NJAC, and that is why that law was struck down. There's also an empire within an empire in Supreme Court. That's what the barb is, which has come in from the union government. Well, the judiciary says that primacy in appointments and judicial appointment need to remain with the Chief Justice of India. Talking about the Collegium system and who is to blame for the high judicial vacancies, you have the government saying that the vacations, high number of writ petitions or the PILs taken by the court are the cause. And judiciary is against the NJAC, judges appointing judges. That's another one reason that the Law Minister cited. You also have the voices saying that the politics cannot influence judiciary. One of the key concerns of the judiciary has been the political interference in judicial appointments. The dark period that the Supreme Court and the high courts of the country saw during the emergency era is a scar that has not gone away, and those memories continue to dominate the manner in which the relation between the executive and the judiciary has evolved. It is one which is riddled with many conflicts, and more importantly, there is a complete lack of trust between both the sides. Now, talking about this fight that continues to intensify and talking about where should the public interest lie, we should know how our judges are appointed, what are the parameters, what does the Supreme Court Collegium or a government looks at while they give an assent for a judge to be appointed. Whose right is supreme? I guess it's the people. We discuss tonight. Well, joining us on the broadcast is Mr. Arima Sundaram. He's a senior advocate at the Supreme Court of India. Good evening, sir. It's a pleasure to have you on the broadcast. Not the first time that we are discussing this issue, but a very serious observation coming in from a Supreme Court bench, which says that if the transfer of judges between various high courts is held by the government or is delayed by the government, there can be administrative action or action on the judicial side. Do you see this as a potent escalation?
Well, according to me, it was an inevitability. I think the court gave a long enough rope to the government to follow the law. And when the government still seems to be averse to following the law which has been laid down by the Supreme Court and which under Article 141 of our Constitution is the law declared by the Supreme Court as the law of the land, when the government is showing a hesitance to follow the law, I think it was inevitable at some stage the patience of the court would run out. And what the court's direction or what the court's observation today was really saying that, look, if you don't follow the law, the court can direct the government to follow the law, not merely by administrative interplay, but by a judicial order, because there is a legal duty for the government to follow the law. And if the government fails in following the legal duty, in complying with its legal duty, that is when the court comes in to direct the government to act in accordance with law. But let's understand the genesis of this whole issue. And I don't see what is happening today, why all of a sudden it's becoming such a huge issue. The very basic structure of our Constitution is separation of powers. And separation of powers is that there has to be a complete independence of the judiciary. What happened way back during the time of emergency and otherwise, when it was the executive who was appointing the judiciary and the judiciary itself had no role, except as the executive liked to term it advisory, there was a lot of flack which came up about the manner and the nature of appointment of judges and what was following, resulting in the famous judgment of the Supreme Court, which clearly laid down that the Collegium of the Supreme Court, to maintain the independence of the judiciary, will be the best body to decide as to judicial matters of postings, of elevations, of transfers. And
Mr. Sundaram, with due respect, please allow me an interjection. Please allow me an interjection. With due respect, there's an interjection that I want to make. Does the separation of power or the term quote-unquote judicial independence mean that the government cannot have any role when it comes to initiation of the names for elevation at High Court or at the Supreme Court? Or the government, compared to the present system of appointment, they cannot have any greater say. The case that the government is trying to push is of reform. They are saying, yes, Collegium exists. It exists as the law of the land. But under the judgments, the second part of the NJAC judgment itself, there are various reforms that has been advocated by the Supreme Court itself. And under those reforms, we should have some more say. Any further say of the government, does that conflict with judicial independence?
In fact, there is no doubt about the fact that the executive can have a role. You ask me specific questions, let me give you specific responses.
Yes.
Number one, can the government initiate appointment of judges? Definitely yes. It is always open to suggest to the court, to the Collegium, to consider the elevation of certain people as judges. Two, can the government have any role in the elevation of judges? Answer yes. And do they have a role? Certainly yes. Because what happens is that the Collegium gives its recommendations to the government. The government then can consider it. The government can thereafter send it back and bring to the notice of the Collegium various aspects, why they feel someone's elevation is suitable or not suitable, or why a transfer is suitable or not suitable. And then it's a duty of the Collegium to consider all that. And after they consider it, if they send it back to the government, they can either accept what the government says, or they can modify their view in some way, or they can send it back to the government and reiterate it. Now, when they reiterate it, the government is bound to follow it. The point here is the buck has to stop somewhere. It can't be court to government, government to court, court to government, government to court, and nothing happens. Now, you ask the third question, and let me answer you very clearly. Can the government not have a role? I, for once, have always advocated this fact that an NJAC is a very good idea, that it can be duly represented by the judiciary. It can be represented by, and of course, if you take somebody like the Prime Minister, if he's on the body to select for the elevations to Supreme Court, a person like him will want the best of the country, someone like the Prime Minister, maybe the leader of the opposition, yes, and that would work, but the final say has to be left to the judiciary. They can be involved in a collective decision making. If it is unanimous, well and good. But if there is some kind of a tie, then the tiebreaker should be the judiciary. Why did the NJAC fail, the Act? Because the Act said the tiebreaker has to be the executive. Now, the whole point was, the NJAC did not see it as a collective decision where if there is a disagreement or if there is a split, the Chief Justice will decide. They made it that the assent of the executive was a must.
Yes, yes.
Now, the moment that comes in, the independence goes. So it is not as though there cannot be a collective body, but the collective body has to be such that when push comes to shove, if there is a split in the decision, it has to be the judiciary to decide. And that preserves the independence of the judiciary.
Sir, to put it into context for our viewers and in the larger public interest, you're a veteran at the bar. You have seen how the Collegium has evolved, how the judicial appointments are made in this country. And you would know better than me that the standoff between the government and the Supreme Court Collegium is not new. We have seen it earlier as well. I remember the last incident was when there was the Chief Justice of India, Justice T.S. Thakur, and Law Minister was Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, and there was this open confrontation of sorts that had happened between the judiciary. Even that time, then Chief Justice of India had warned the government that we will pass judicial orders if you do not listen to us. Is this another round? Is this another bout between the government and the judiciary? Or perhaps you sense there's a serious thinking within the government that there can be steps to bring in some kind of legislation for the reform of the present collegium system. What's your understanding, sir?
Let me tell you something. The government can always bring in legislation. They can bring in legislation which, as long for the selection of judges or otherwise, constitutional amendments, which so long as it maintains and subserves the separation of powers and independence of the judiciary, can be upheld. You can change the system. You can change the system from collegium to something else. But whatever system you change has to see that the separation of powers is maintained, that the independence of the judiciary is maintained, and the judiciary cannot be selected by an executive, because then what happens to separation of powers? Don't forget one thing, that the very concept of separation of powers is that each different power does its activity, and the judiciary's role in separation of powers is to ensure that all other branches do their activities in accordance with the Constitution.
Yes, yes.
Now, you are always going to have conflict, because if the executive acts in a manner which maybe suits the necessity of the day, but maybe against basic constitutional requirements, the judiciary may turn around and say, I'm sorry, that is not permissible. Now, if that happens, there will be a conflict. But the very concept of separation of powers in itself is something which will always result in conflict in whichever country. It's not India.
I agree with
Wherever there's separation of powers, there has always been conflict at some stage or the other, because one is the watchdog of the other, and there is nothing wrong in that.
And that conflict perhaps is to guard the larger public interest, as you're saying. Sir, as I end this wonderful discussion with you, I want your opinion and your candid opinion. Are you an advocate or a proponent that the reform of the Collegium should be done through a piece of legislation preserving the primacy of the Chief Justice of India, because this is a matter that has been pending too long for judiciary to do it by themselves? And if there is a piece of legislation that preserves the primacy of the Chief Justice of India, preserves the core of the separation of powers as you're talking about, then perhaps it can be a good idea.
Yes, I believe that would be a good idea. I believe that will take part, the government, instead of the Collegium making a suggestion, government looking at it on its own, giving its recommendations, sending it back, and then it going back and forth. If there is one body, but the primacy of the judiciary, ensuring separation of powers, independence of the judiciary is maintained, I'm sure such a legislation would be ideal, and that will have a large base exchanging of views,
Sure.
both by the executive and the judiciary, to hopefully come to a unanimous conclusion. But if at all there is not, then the primacy of the Chief Justice has to be maintained.
Well, voices like you from the bar, I guess, should be heard from both the sides, sir. It's always a pleasure to have you on the broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to take all those points to Mr. Vikas Singh as well, who's a senior advocate at the Supreme Court of India and also a president at the Supreme Court Bar Association, joining us on the broadcast. Good evening, Vikas Singh. Thank you so much, sir, for speaking with us. I remember having this conversation with you earlier as well, and you had pointed out that the government is completely free to bring in another constitutional amendment, or they are completely free to bring in another piece of legislation which preserves the primacy of the Chief Justice of India. Before we go as to what may happen further, how do you see these recent attacks from the Law Minister when he says that one of the key reasons of pendency of cases at the High Courts is because of the vacations that the courts take?
Well, as far as vacations are concerned, the Law Minister has to understand how the system works in the judiciary. And because he's never practiced law, so obviously he has had no first-hand experience of the functioning of the judiciary. The vacations are an integral part of our functioning, and it is necessary because if you see the way the judges function, they sit in court from 10:30 to 4. They read their briefs before coming to the court, and invariably there are 60-70 briefs to be read in a day for each one of them. And then they also deliver judgments at home. Now, if there is the longest judgment, it may take hours to dictate that judgment. And I remember once Justice B.N. Karpal was sitting in the High Court and he dictated a judgment for 3 full days. He just came to court and dictated a judgment, and he used to dictate that judgment. Now, if judges start dictating judgment in the time which is supposed to be the time, which people feel is the time where the judges are actually supposed to be working, then you can imagine that no hearing will take place. Not a single hearing will take place if a judgment of that kind, or longest judgment, is dictated for 3 days. Then 3 days, no litigant will get any matter being taken up. So the Law Minister obviously does not know the system of how the judges function. And if this kind of functioning, if you don't take a proper break, and we all look forward to this kind of a break, even for lawyers, basically it's a break without, there is no payment because there is no, we're not on salary. So the moment we take a break of this kind, we have to be completely without any payment for this entire period. And very few of us actually work in the vacations. Most of us completely leave the court and leave the city and go away. So this lack of understanding of the working of this system is the result of this kind of a statement.
So I wonder if this is a lack of understanding, or the matter has really gone bitter between the Supreme Court and the executive, that these kind of barbs are taken. And this was not an oral statement, mind you. It was said through a response on the floor of the House in Lok Sabha. I must reiterate that there were multiple reasons that were cited as to why there is high pendency. But one of the reasons cited was also vacation. Coming to the second aspect, there is an open warning that has come in from the Supreme Court that if the transfer of judges at various high courts is delayed by the government of the day, there would be action on the judicial side or on the administrative side. How do you see this warning coming in from the court?
So, Anusha, it's very, the Constitution as it is today, if there is something against a particular judge, or if a particular judge, is not behaving properly, the only action that can be taken against him is to, impeach him, which has to be done by 2/3 majority of the parliament. Invariably, it has never happened and it has never succeeded, and the parliament is not in the control of the judiciary. So what happens is that when they recommend a transfer, it is mostly, or I would say 99%, for administrative reasons, where they feel that the particular judge in a particular high court has developed some kind of a nexus, which they feel is not desirable, or it is not good for the functioning of the judiciary, or for the way in which the judges should behave and function. So a transfer is then sought to ensure that this kind of deviant behavior is curtailed, and if he goes to a new place and if he knows that he's under transfer for this reason, obviously he becomes careful, and he invariably it results in people self-correcting themselves. Now this is the only corrective mechanism which the Collegium has to ensure that wherever they have some kind of a complaint of this kind, which is not of the kind where the Parliament will go in for impeachment, then they do this transfer. Now if these transfers are delayed, then it gives an impression that the judge is playing politics, because he's trying to ensure with the government that he stays in a particular place.
Okay.
And that is a very, very disturbing thing, because that really shows that the judge, that further, justifies the transfer.
Sir, you believe that there is ground for the Supreme Court to take action on the judicial side?
I think the Supreme Court has dealt with the, with the central government with, I would say, kid gloves. And in a contempt petition, even till date, no contempt notices have gone.
Okay.
So if contempt notices had gone, probably by now things would have sorted out. But the Supreme Court also, considering the, delicate nature of this balance between the judiciary and the executive, is trying to, sort of fine-tune things to ensure that, it doesn't escalate very much. And, and that is why these
I discussed this proposition with you earlier as well. And I remember you saying, and we were discussing this with Mr. Arima Sundaram as well, that if the primacy of the Chief Justice of India is preserved, then another piece of legislation, if the government decides to bring in, it can survive the test of the Supreme Court as well. This latest standoff between the government and the judiciary is not something that has not happened earlier. It has happened earlier. We have seen earlier Chief Justice of India and the Law Minister involved in a bitter war. It happened during the tenure of CJI D Y Chandrachud as well. And then the Law Minister was, Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, and even that time there was a bitter confrontation. It happened in an open court as well. What is it that makes this confrontation far more serious in nature? Because with every passing day, it only escalates. What is the logical conclusion of this kind of escalation, or I must rather say the tutu meme that we are witnessing from these two key constitutional pillars of our country?
Well, Anusha, it's a little unfortunate because, if the Law Minister says that judges should not hear bail matters, and bail is a matter of personal liberty, then again, that shows complete lack of understanding of the importance of civil liberties in this country. If the learned minister says that the Supreme Court should not hear the BBC ban case, now that is something which is to do with the freedom of speech and expression, which is a fundamental right guaranteed even to non-citizens. So if you can't, if these issues are not to be taken up by the Supreme Court, then what else is the Supreme Court supposed to do? But having said that, this escalation of this tutu meme has resulted because they are a bad loser. So when they lost the NJAC, they lost it on a very small window that they wanted to have the privacy of appointing or rather having the final say of appointment. And I've been crying hoarse. I've also drafted a piece of legislation, given it to the Law Minister. He's also mentioned it in the Parliament. The window to bring in a new law has always been there. I mean, if you want to actually, if you're really interested in good people being appointed, and if the real interest is not just to control, I mean, there are two aspects,
Sure.
One Reform is to get the best people to be appointed in the judiciary. That should be, I would say that should be the, interest of both the judiciary and the government. So if that is the real reason, then I don't understand why do you want to have the final say on the appointment. You can always do that by bringing in legislation to see that what is the such.
And I completely agree with you there, sir, that there are multiple aspects, multiple layers of Collegium and how it operates, and there are various things that can be done without attacking the primacy of the Chief Justice of India or the final word that the judiciary wants to have. And all eyes on that piece of legislation that you've drafted and presented to the Law Minister. Let's see what happens. Will the government bite the bullet? And will there be another piece of legislation that they present in the Parliament? Thank you, Mr. Vikas Singh, for joining us on the broadcast, and thank you for your time. This entire battle is far from over. Will it finally result in government bringing in another piece of legislation for the reforms which are pending, or the Collegium will take up the process of reform from within? All eyes on that development. Well, moving on and getting you some key stories from across the country. Prime Minister Narendra Modi participated in a Kirtan program via video conferencing today. The prayers were held in Assam's Barpeta. The Prime Minister also addressed the devotees. The month-long Kirtan began on the 6th of January and shall be convened in the next few days. Hundreds of women held protests against the Civic Supply Department in Puducherry. The protest was held demanding the closure of restaurant bars and reopening of ration shops. A video of a speeding car dragging a motorcycle for about 4 kilometers in Gurugram went viral on social media. After a probe, the accused was arrested and his car was taken into custody. An incident of fire has been reported near Bhavan of Mata Vaishno Devi Cave Shrine. The fire was brought under control and no loss of life or injuries has been reported. The cause of fire seems to be a short circuit. The US has accused China of operating a spy balloon over sensitive locations housing nuclear weapons in Montana. President Joe Biden has been briefed on the possible options for a US response, including using fighter jets to shoot down the balloon. Experts are saying that it could flare up the tensions between the two countries ahead of a visit to Beijing by Washington's top diplomat. And US President Joe Biden hosted former President Bill Clinton at the White House. He invited Clinton to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Family and Medical Leave Act. Catholic worshippers in Mexico City marked the end of the Christmas period with a procession and a mass in honor of baby Jesus. The festival is one of the most important religious events in Mexico's calendar. A retired police officer dog was rescued in California after the animal fell in the well. The German Shepherd was being walked by a US Navy veteran when the dog disappeared into a well's opening that was covered by a bush. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with the French President in Paris. Macron offered to help revive long-stalled dialogue between the Israelis and the Palestinians. A New Jersey woman who was recently elected to her borough council was shot to death. She was shot multiple times and died on the spot. Now, she was elected for the first time in 2021 when she ousted a Democratic incumbent. And a baker from Switzerland has set the Guinness Book of World Record by making the world's largest wearable cake dress. Leaving you with these visuals.
Indian financial markets are governed. There's never a compromise. It is secret. One instance, however much talked about globally it may be, I would think it is not going to be indicative of how well Indian financial markets are governed. Indian banking sector today is at a comfortable level. India remains as before absolutely well-governed, stable government and also very well, regulated financial market.
सेबी और आरबीआई तो दो संस्थाएं हैं जिनको जांच कराना जरूरी है, पर हम मानते हैं कुछ निष्पक्ष जांच की जरूरत है।
सेबी ने भी इनको फेल किया है, सरकार ने भी उनको फेल किया है, इसीलिए हम चाह रहे हैं कि एक जॉइंट पार्लियामेंट्री कमेटी का गठन हो।
Hello everyone, you're watching News Epicenter with me, Maria Shakil. Amidst the ongoing storm over the Adani FPO, Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman spoke to Network 18 on the entire controversy. Finance Minister said that SBI and LIC, who were the key investors, have issued detailed statements over the matter and the markets are well regulated. She says that one instance of volatility is not indicative of the India story, adding that the banking sector is strong and investor confidence is high. This comes in the wake of the Hindenburg report ahead of the Adani FPO, which has also caused a storm in Parliament. The opposition has demanded an independent investigation and has accused the government of a cover-up. And amidst this controversy, has the finance minister reassured investors of the strength of the Indian economy and the ambition of the budget. Moreover, is the opposition playing politics of conjecture over a foreign report on the Adani Group? First, let's listen in to Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, who spoke exclusively to Network 18 Group Editor-in-Chief Rahul Joshi.
Your budget was very well received by the markets. In fact, while you were speaking, the markets were really going up. But the rout in the Adani stocks somewhat spoiled the party. There is a general nervousness in the market. How does your government see this?
I look at the budget for having covered all the sections of the society. We've tried, and it has been a detailing that which has consumed a lot of time in preparation of this budget. The details is what has brought the difference in touching so many different sectors and segments of our society. We've got something on offer for each one of them. So therefore, if it's being received very well, I'm very glad. But of course, that motivates me to be able to now take it upon myself to better implement it down to the last person who's aimed at. So I would think the impact of the budget, the immediate impact of the budget on the market, and subsequent to, let's say, for whatever reason it trailed back, I think in the next few days the budget's impact will still continue to hold the markets high.
The opposition is taking aim at your government, saying that the banking and insurance companies have large exposure in Adani stocks. And the investors and the broader market is looking to you for some direction on this issue. Is our banking and insurance system resilient to take this shock?
I want to recall the words, coming from the horse's mouth has greater credibility. Both the SBI and LIC have issued detailed statements. And I know the chairperson or the CMD has himself come out and explained how they are not overexposed or whatever they said. Yes. And also said, look, we are sitting over profits for the exposure that we have, which is well within the limit. That's what I understand they have said, and I've again read it through the media. They have very clearly said that their exposure is very well within the permitted limits, and that they are, even now with the valuation falling as well, they are still sitting over profit. So if that is the horse's mouth, as I refer to, word from the horse's mouth, but in general, both with the RBI, we do have the Financial Stability Board's meeting, which happens once in 6 months. We meet, even recently we have met. So I can only very clearly say, both the RBI and we, because of the FSB's meeting, Financial Stability Board's meeting,